It was a sweltering summer afternoon in Salvador. The scorching sun bathed the old streets of Pelourinho as tourists strolled along the cobblestone alleys, admiring the colonial architecture. In the corner of a small, street-side restaurant, where the smell of acarage and vatapa filled the air, there was a makeshift stage. This place, called Sabor de Bahia, was known for its traditional food and for giving space to small artists looking for a chance to shine. However, that afternoon, what really caught everyone's attention wasn't the menu or the architecture but the presence of a young black boy, no older than 12, standing by the microphone. He wore simple clothes, and his eyes carried a depth far beyond his age. His name was Davi. Davi was there not by choice, but out of necessity. His grandmother, Dona Ana, had been hospitalized for months, battling a rare heart disease. The treatment required an expensive surgery, far beyond what his humble family could afford. So, Davi found a way to raise money by singing. He had a natural gift for music, with a voice both sweet and powerful that echoed through the streets since he was little. People were moved when they heard him, but it was never enough to cover the treatment costs. Davi took a deep breath, his sweaty fingers trembling as he gripped the microphone. The hum of conversations in the background gradually faded as people noticed the boy preparing to sing. The entire restaurant fell silent, as if expecting something extraordinary. But no one, not even Davi, could have predicted what was about to happen. As soon as he touched the microphone and began to release the first note, something strange occurred. The sound that came out wasn't just his voice. A supernatural melody, almost magical, enveloped the room. It was as if he had tapped into something divine, a note that made time seem to slow down. The words Davi sang seemed to come from somewhere else, as if he were a vessel for something far greater than himself. The people in the restaurant were frozen, some with tears in their eyes, others completely still, unable to comprehend what was happening. The music wasn't just beautiful, it was captivating, transporting people to a place they had never experienced. Davi, however, seemed unaware of this. He sang with his eyes closed, entirely immersed in the moment. Suddenly, in the middle of the song, a man in a dark suit sitting in the back stood up abruptly. His name was Gustavo. He was a music producer, and at that moment, his professional instinct told him that this boy was different. He knew he had found something unique, something that could change lives, not just Davi's, but his own. Davi finished the song in profound silence. Everyone in the restaurant was in shock, as if they had just witnessed something sacred. Gustavo approached, his eyes fixed on the boy. "How did you do that?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "Do what?" Davi responded, confused. He had no idea that anything extraordinary had happened. To him, it was just another song, like so many others he had sung before. Before Gustavo could say more, the restaurant owner, SCU Jose, interrupted the conversation, looking distressed. He held a phone in his hand, his face pale. "Davi, you need to go to the hospital. Now." Davi's heart raced. Something had happened to his grandmother. Without thinking twice, Davi ran to the hospital. Gustavo, intrigued and still under the impact of what he had just witnessed, decided to follow him. They crossed the bustling streets of Salvador, the sound of cars and tourists growing distant as they approached the city's public hospital. When Davi arrived, he was met by a nurse who knew him well. Dona Ana was in critical condition. The surgery needed to happen immediately, but the doctors made it clear that without payment, they couldn't proceed. Desperation consumed the boy. He knew that the money he had raised from his performances wasn't nearly enough. His only hope was slipping away before his eyes. Then Gustavo, who had remained silent until that moment, stepped forward. "I'll pay for the surgery," he said, with a firmness that surprised even himself. Davi looked at Gustavo with a mix of gratitude and distrust. Why was this man, who barely knew him, so willing to help? But at that moment, he had no choice. His grandmother's life depended on it. The procedure was approved, and Davi spent the night keeping vigil, waiting for news. Meanwhile, Gustavo stayed by his side, like a silent shadow. He was still perplexed by what he had heard in the restaurant. It wasn't just Davi's voice that had impressed him, but something deeper. A sense that the boy had a special gift, something he couldn't explain. In the early hours of the next morning, the surgeon finally emerged from the operating room. "The surgery was a success," he said, with a slight smile. "Your grandmother will be fine." Davi collapsed into tears, relief flooding his body. But while he embraced the news that his grandmother would survive, Gustavo had something else on his mind. "We need to talk, Davi," he said, in a serious tone. And so, a new chapter in the boy's life was about to begin. After Dona Anna's successful surgery, the atmosphere in the hospital seemed less suffocating. Davi felt relieved but also exhausted, as if the weight of the world had been lifted, even if just for a moment. He spent the night by his grandmother's side, watching her slow, steady breathing. The faint smile on her wrinkled face, even unconscious, indicated that she was out of danger. The next morning, Gustavo reappeared. He waited patiently while Davi checked on his grandmother's condition, then called him aside to a quiet corner of the hospital corridor. "Davi, what happened yesterday was something beyond normal. I've worked in music for many years, and I've never seen anything like that," Gustavo began, his serious gaze locked on the boy. "I want to help you, but for that to happen, you need to trust me." "What do you mean?" Davi asked, his voice low. He was still processing everything, from the moment he had sung to his grandmother's surgery. "I want to offer you a contract. I'll take you to record, make sure your voice is heard around the world. With your talent, we can achieve something big, and in return, I'll take care of everything else. Your grandmother will never have to worry about money again." Davi felt a mix of emotions. On the one hand, the proposal seemed like the perfect solution to the problems he and his family faced. But there was something about Gustavo's approach that made him hesitate. He remembered the strange sensation he had felt when he touched the microphone. It didn't seem to come just from him, but from somewhere beyond his understanding. "I don't know. I just want my grandmother to be okay," Davi said, unsure of what to think. "And she will be. But you also need to think about your future, Davi, and your talent." Gustavo paused, choosing his words carefully. "Your talent is something rare. Very rare. I've never heard anything like it, and believe me, I've met many singers. It's not just your voice, it's something more. And this could change your life forever." Davi looked at the ground. He had never thought about fame, money, or a music career. For him, singing was an escape, something he did because it was part of who he was. But now, it seemed like it was his only way out. "I need to think about it," the boy replied, still unsure. Gustavo nodded, as if he had expected that response. "Of course, but don't take too long. The world is full of opportunities, and they don't always wait." As Gustavo walked away down the corridor, Davi felt a different kind of weight on his shoulders. It was as if his life, which had been limited to the streets and the hospital, was about to change in ways he could barely imagine. But would this change come with risks? Or would it be the answer he had been searching for? In the days that followed, Davi divided his time between visits to the hospital and wandering the neighborhood. Pelerinho was his refuge, and there he always found inspiration. Yet something was different. Since the episode in the restaurant, he avoided singing. Every time he thought about raising his voice, the memory of that supernatural melody made him hesitate. He wondered if it had been real or just a figment of his imagination. While he wandered the cobblestone streets, a familiar figure appeared. Joanna, a childhood friend, the daughter of a neighbor who had always supported him. Joanna, with her long braided hair and curious eyes, noticed Davi's unease. "You're different, Davi. What's going on?" she asked, sitting beside him on a bench near São Francisco Church. "A lot. I don't know if I can explain," he replied, gazing at the horizon. Joanna had always been a good listener. Since they were little, they shared confidences and dreams, and she knew better than anyone Davi's love for music. "Try. You always tell me everything," she insisted, with a gentle smile. Davi took a deep breath and told her about the performance at the restaurant, about Gustavo, and the offer he had received. When he mentioned the strange moment when he started to sing, Joanna's eyes widened. "Do you think it was just your voice? Because, Davi, I've heard you sing many times, and no one's ever reacted like that. There's something more there?" He fell silent. That was the same question that had been tormenting him. There was something beyond the music, a force he couldn't explain. "And what are you going to do?" Joanna asked, after a long pause. "I don't know. He wants me to record songs and become famous. But it feels wrong. Or strange. I can't explain." Joanna stared at him intently. "Maybe you need to find out where your voice comes from. Have you ever wondered why your music touches people so deeply? Maybe there's something you don't even know about yourself." Davi thought about that. He had always known that his music had an impact on people, but he had never questioned its origin. It was as if singing was so natural that he didn't need explanations. But now, everything seemed uncertain. Joanna, with her calm wisdom, suggested something unexpected. "Let's go to May Luisa's house. She's a healer. She knows old stories. Maybe she can help you understand what's going on." The idea seemed absurd at first glance, but Davi was desperate for answers. And deep down, he knew Joanna was right. Maybe there was something bigger, something he couldn't see, but that May Luisa could. By the end of the afternoon, Davi and Joanna made their way to May Luisa's house, an elderly woman known in the neighborhood for her spiritual knowledge. Her small house sat atop a steep hill, surrounded by medicinal plants and small charms hanging in the windows. Upon arriving, they were greeted by a profound silence, broken only by the rustling of leaves in the wind. May Luisa, with her wise and deep-set eyes, welcomed them with a look that seemed to transcend time. "I've been expecting you," she said, before either of them could say a word. Davi and Joanna exchanged surprised glances. "Come in, Davi. Your voice carries more than you realize. And now, it's time to find out what it truly means." Davi's heart raced. Something was about to be revealed, and he felt that his life would never be the same again. Davi and Joanna followed May Luisa into a small, dimly lit room filled with images of saints and lit candles, their flames gently dancing in the air. The atmosphere carried a different weight, as if something unseen was present, waiting. May Luisa gestured for them to sit at a rustic wooden table. In the center, there was a bowl of crystal-clear water and some herbs scattered around it. Without a word, she picked up a sprig of rue and dipped it in the water, tracing slow circles while murmuring words in an ancient language that neither Davi nor Joanna understood. After a long silence, the healer looked directly into Davi's eyes. "Boy, do you know what you carry in your voice?" she asked, her voice deep and laden with wisdom. Davi simply shook his head, confused. "Your voice is not just yours. You are the heir of something old, very old." She paused, studying the boy's reaction. "In your family, there is a lineage of singers, but not just any singers. The gift you have comes from a time long before us, from an ancestral song used to connect the souls of the living with the spiritual world. It's no coincidence that your voice has such an impact. What you experienced in that restaurant wasn't an accident. Something within you awakened." Joanna was stunned, and Davi could barely process what he was hearing. "What does that mean?" Davi asked, trying to organize his thoughts. I just sang, like I always do." May Luisa smiled, understanding. "What you experienced was an awakening. Your voice isn't just music. It has the power to heal, to touch souls. The song you carry is a rare gift, passed down through generations, but it's not something to be used carelessly. There's a great responsibility in that, boy." Davi felt the weight of her words, as if something larger than himself was unfolding. At the same time, a quiet fear began to grow in his chest. This all seemed far beyond his comprehension. And why now? Why is this happening now? Joanna asked, intrigued. May Luisa looked at her, a glimmer in her eyes. "Because the time has come. When your grandmother fell ill, Davi, your soul opened to what was needed. You sang to save her life, and the universe responded. But there's more to it." She stared at the boy intently. "Your gift didn't awaken by chance, and people will want to get close to it. Not all of them with good intentions." Davi immediately thought of Gustavo. The producer had offered help, but now he wondered what the true intentions were behind that generous offer. Does the man who offered to help, does he have something to do with this? Davi asked, uneasy. May Luisa sighed deeply, as if she already knew the answer before Davi asked. "Gustavo senses your gift, or at least part of it. He felt the power in your voice, but he doesn't fully understand what it means. What he sees is an opportunity, a chance to profit from something he doesn't understand. You need to be careful, Davi. This gift is sacred, and if it's used the wrong way, it can bring imbalance. Davi was silent, May Luisa's words echoing in his mind. He knew Gustavo didn't seem just interested in music, but now, everything made sense. The producer wasn't just an ambitious man. He was drawn to the power Davi carried, even if he didn't understand its origin. "And what should I do?" he asked, his voice low. May Luisa moved closer, placing her hand on the boy's shoulder. "You need to learn to control your gift, to use your voice with wisdom. Don't be swayed by the lure of money or fame. What you have is rare and powerful, and if used wrongly, it can destroy. If you follow the right path, your voice can heal and bring peace. But if you stray," she paused, her expression serious, "you'll attract things you don't want to know." The atmosphere seemed to grow heavier, and Davi felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He had never thought of his music in that way. To him, it was just a form of expression, but now, it seemed much more complex. "What should I do about Gustavo?" Davi asked, worried. "He paid for my grandmother's surgery. I owe him for that." May Luisa sighed, as if she had already anticipated this question. "Not all debts are paid with money, Davi. He did something for you, but now he wants something in return. You need to decide if you're willing to give up your soul to repay that debt. Be careful who you make deals with, boy." Davi knew she was right. Something inside him had warned him about Gustavo from the beginning, but he had ignored it. Now, he needed to find a way out of the situation without compromising what was most precious to him. That night, Davi had difficulty sleeping. May Luisa's words echoed in his mind, mixed with the image of Gustavo and the feeling that he was being pulled into a dangerous path. He tossed and turned in bed, trying to find a solution. The next morning, he decided he needed to talk to Gustavo. He needed to understand his intentions, but above all, he needed to protect his gift. He didn't know exactly how he would do it, but he knew he couldn't go on without confronting the producer first. Davi called Gustavo, and they arranged to meet at a nearby cafe. When he arrived, Gustavo was already there, with a confident smile on his face. "Davi, I'm glad you came. I thought you might have doubts about my offer," Gustavo said, offering the boy a seat. "I do," Davi replied bluntly. "I understand it's a lot to process, but trust me, boy. This is the path to something big," Gustavo continued, not noticing the unease in Davi's gaze. "You want my music, but you don't know what it really is," Davi said, directly. Gustavo raised an eyebrow. "Of course I do. You're talented. That's all that matters in the music world. What else do you think your voice has?" Davi hesitated. Gustavo truly didn't know about the power he carried. Perhaps what May Luisa had said was true. Gustavo only saw an opportunity without understanding the consequences. "I need time," Davi finally said. Gustavo looked frustrated but tried to hide it. "Of course, time is something we all have, in small amounts. But, Davi, opportunities like this don't come every day." Davi knew he was at a crossroads, and every decision from that moment would shape his future. Davi left the meeting with Gustavo, feeling a mix of anguish and clarity. As tempting as the idea of pursuing a music career and securing his grandmother's financial future was, he knew his gift was much deeper than just success and fame. With each step he took through the streets of Salvador, he felt like he was walking away from something simple and into increasingly murky waters. He knew he couldn't ignore May Luisa's warnings, but he also knew he couldn't continue relying on Gustavo's goodwill, especially because the man clearly wanted more than Davi was willing to offer. Davi returned to the hospital that afternoon to visit his grandmother. Dona Ana was now conscious, still fragile, but smiling, and her presence always brought him immense comfort. He sat by her side, took her hand, and told her about the past few weeks. Though he avoided discussing the deeper details, such as his gift, he talked about Gustavo's proposal and the indecision he felt. "Grandma, I don't know what to do. He helped pay for your surgery, but I feel like something's wrong with all of this." Dona Ana looked at him with the love and wisdom of a long life full of challenges. "Davi, life will always present you with hard choices, but I've known you since your first cry, and I know you have a good soul. Money, success, those things come and go, but what you carry inside, no one can take away. If you feel something's not right, trust your heart. Her words touched Davy deeply. He realized that, deep down, he already knew what he had to do. But before he acted, there was something else he needed to discover. His gift came from an ancient lineage, and May Luisa had mentioned that he needed to learn to control his voice. Now, that seemed more urgent than ever. Determined to understand his power better, Davy returned to May Luisa's house the next day, this time alone. The healer welcomed him with the same wise and warm look, as if she already knew what the boy had come to seek. I need to learn about my voice. About who I really am, Davy said, straightforward. May Luisa nodded slowly. You're ready to hear the truth then, but know that it may be heavier than you imagine. She led him back to the same room where they had spoken before. As they sat down, May Luisa began to tell a story intertwined with the deep roots of African culture brought forcibly to Brazil centuries ago. Your lineage comes from a people who used song as a form of spiritual communication. They were healers, shamans, people who had the gift of connecting the world of the living to the world of spirits. This power was passed down through generations, but over time, many forgot or lost touch with this force. But you, Davy, have been blessed with this connection intact, she explained, her voice heavy with gravity. Davy listened to every word with a mix of fascination and fear. It was as if he were discovering a part of himself that had always existed, but of which he had never been aware. And why now? Why is this awakening now? He asked, anxious. Because, boy, your need was greater than your doubt. When you sang for your grandmother's life, the universe responded. But be careful. What you carry is rare and powerful, and there are those who will want to use it for their own purposes, she said, with a meaningful look. Davy immediately knew that Gustavo was one of those people. Even without understanding what was at stake, Gustavo had sensed the power of his voice and wanted to exploit it to achieve fame and fortune. I don't want to lose this gift, nor do I want to use it wrongly, Davy said, his voice low but firm. May Luisa smiled, as if she had been waiting for this response. The first step is to accept who you are, and the second is to learn to control this power. It's not just yours, Davy. It's a legacy, and you need to honor it. Davy knew he had a long journey ahead, but now he was no longer lost. He understood that his gift was a blessing but also a responsibility. Above all, he knew he couldn't let Gustavo, or anyone else, exploit what was sacred in his music. With a lighter heart and clearer mind, Davy knew he had to close the chapter with Gustavo. He couldn't remain in debt to the producer, nor could he follow a path that would compromise his gift and his future. So, he decided to confront Gustavo one last time. They met at the same cafe where they had spoken before. Gustavo, confident and certain that Davy would accept his offer, smiled when he saw him arrive. Davy, you've made your decision, right? Ready to start recording? Davy looked directly into Gustavo's eyes, this time with a firmness the producer hadn't expected. I've made my decision, yes, and I'm not going to record with you, Gustavo. Gustavo's smile disappeared instantly. What are you saying, Davy? I paid for your grandmother's surgery. I gave you a chance, Gustavo said, his voice filled with frustration. And I'm grateful for that. But my music isn't just for selling records or making money. I have something you don't understand, something I can't give to someone who only thinks about profit. This gift isn't just mine. It's much bigger than me, and I can't betray that. Gustavo was silent for a moment, clearly angry, but realizing that Davy was resolute. So, that's it? You're going to throw it all away? He asked, incredulous. Davy shook his head. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm protecting what's important to me. Gustavo stood still for a few seconds, digesting the boy's words. He got up abruptly, grabbed his briefcase, and left without looking back, muttering something about wasting time with ingratitude. Davy watched him walk away, feeling a mix of relief and freedom. As Gustavo disappeared into the distance, Davy knew he had made the right decision. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that now he was in control of his destiny. No rush, no forced commitments. Whatever came next, he would face it with the same courage that had led him to sing to save his grandmother. And, above all, he knew that his voice, his gift, was not something he could sell or lose. It was a sacred heritage, a connection to something greater than the world of men, and he was determined to use it wisely. As he walked home, Davy let out a light whistle, and for the first time in days, his music sounded light, pure, and full of hope.